Hello, my YouTube friends. I am so sorry for missing last week. I don't know, I just needed a little break from social media and from making videos, and my family and I actually went on a really fun camping trip up in the mountains. And so sometimes you just got to do those things. But we are back this week. I am Jessica Lovato, RN. This is my channel for all things nursing and healthy living. So if those are things that interest you, please like and subscribe below. I make videos almost every week. Like I said, sometimes you got to take a break, but hey, that's okay. And this week we're back and here we go. This week I want to talk about diet and disease. I was going back through some of my old education. For those of you who don't know, when you're a nurse, you need to take at least 30 hours of continuing education every 2 years to renew your license. And so I take the opportunity to try and get my education in things that I am really interested in. And around this time last year, I did one called Diet Revolution. I hope this focuses. So it's called the Diet Revolution. This was taught by CE International, and the teacher herself was actually had her doctorate in nutrition. So if you need to know where the authority is coming from, that is where. This is a topic really near and dear to my heart. My mother has multiple sclerosis, MS, which is an autoimmune disorder. And there's actually some really interesting finding in the world of health and nutrition that has to do with using diet to treat diseases such as MS, and findings have showed some really impressive and hopeful results. And so I'm always looking for the simplest, the easiest, the most budget-friendly way to do things. And hey, if you can really nip it in the bud with diet before you've got all the hospital bills, all the medications, all that time, why not? So that's how I feel about that. And I'm not saying that to offend anyone. I don't want anyone to say, oh, she makes it sound so simple, but you don't know what I'm going through. I do understand. I am an RN in the ICU, and I know how hard these diseases are and how much they take over your life. But that is part of why I want to talk about things in the preventative stage, because maybe some of you who are starting to walk down a path towards something that is maybe a little less genetic than something like MS, but maybe diabetes, obesity, heart disease, those things can really be prevented before they happen, and diet is a really important factor. Okay, so let's continue on. This is the Diet Revolution. I think this might end up being a 2, maybe 3-parter, I'm not sure, because some of the material is dense, but I'm going to try to make it as understandable as possible so that this is something that you can use in your daily life, and for nurses, this is something that you can use to educate your patients on diet and healthy living as well. Okay. So let's talk about a little history just to paint a picture to get things started. There is an obesity and a nutrient deficiency epidemic in this country. It hasn't always been so. We've seen rises in obesity and certain diseases like heart disease and diabetes since the 1970s. And actually in the 1970s, a senator, whose name I'm forgetting right now, was realizing that a lot of his colleagues were all of a sudden dropping dead. Now we know that was from heart attacks. And he wanted to know why, and so he engaged, I think, a Harvard professor and a doctor and a few other people, and created this team to do a study on what was happening. And of course, now we've come so much farther with our understanding in diet, but at that time, they pinpointed fat as the villain. Now we kind of realize that fat isn't the villain, especially not healthy fat, and I think during that time, people were probably dropping dead more from uncontrolled smoking and drinking than the fact that they were eating things like fish or oils or, healthy fats. Even butter in moderation is fine as long as you don't have an intolerance to dairy. So an interesting fact that I found when going through this continuing education course again is, so that started the low-fat diet craze. So since the 1970s, and we just take these things for granted now because we're so used to seeing them in the store, but before that time, there was no such thing as fat-free yogurt. There was no such thing as diet everything or sugar-free everything. But now we see that everywhere, low fat, no fat, and you have to wonder, what are people using as substitutions and how is that affecting my body? And only now that we've had the last 50 years for all of this to develop, are we really seeing those effects in our bodies? And it turns out, and this is from stateofobesity.org, that the average weight gain per decade since the 70s is about 10 pounds, which means that the average person every decade since then is about 10 pounds heavier than they used to be. And so that is insane. And so that is why now when we look at a person with a healthy weight, we call them skinny when really they're just healthy, hopefully. Of course, there are unhealthy ways to be skinny as well. But if you're eating healthy and you don't have any contributing genetic factors that could really impede uncontrolled weight gain, then generally you're going to be at a healthy weight. So there are a lot of health consequences to this new way of eating, and I'm just going to read off this quick list here so you can sort of understand how much this matters. So health consequences of obesity and malnourishment: all causes of death, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, stroke, gallbladder disease, osteoarthritis, sleep apnea, some cancers including endometrial, breast, colon, low quality of life, mental illness such as clinical depression, anxiety, and body pain and difficulty with physical functioning. And like I said, this is from a reliable source. This is CE International. These aren't facts that I'm just throwing out. There are studies behind every slide of this class. So now we want to talk about some important measurements, because people usually think of BMI when they're trying to figure out if they're at a healthy weight or not. And the teacher of this class actually pointed out that even more important measurement, and an easy one to get, is waist circumference. So for a female, you want your waist, which is basically if you tied a string around the middle of your body and then it met at your belly button. That's your waist. So for women, you want it to be less than 35 inches, and for men, less than 40 inches. And why is this measurement so important? Because this measurement is a good reading of your visceral fat. We have two kinds of fat in our bodies. One is subcutaneous, and that tends to set in breast tissue and hips and the bottom and the legs and appendages. And the other kind of fat is visceral fat. Visceral fat sits around the middle of your body. And this is really the dangerous fat, because it doesn't just affect the way that you look and the way that you feel, but it actually affects your hormones. Things like insulin, things like estrogen. These things all play out in how your body functions in day-to-day life. So now we have to ask ourselves, what is the impact of poor quality nutrition, and does poor diet affect disease and increase the likelihood of disease? So I'm going to go over 5 areas pretty quick here, and that'll be our video for the day, but it's nutrition and metabolism, the insulin problem, leaky gut and inflammation, mitochondria, and nutrition and the brain. And then next video, I think we'll start actually getting into various types of diets and what they're good for treating. So we're going to start with nutrition and metabolism. Just an overall view, you want to be having good nutrition because good nutrition for the most part equals a healthy metabolism, especially if this is something you're doing throughout your life over a very long period of time. For some people, when they've been in a nutrition deficit, and I'm using this word nutrition deficit, which you might be thinking, if we have an obesity problem, how is there a deficit? But it's because people are eating too much, but there's no nutrients in what they're eating. So if you went to a third world country where starvation was an issue, those people are having a nutrient deficit because they're not getting any food at all. So over here, we're starving because our body is starving for nutrients, not because we're not eating, but because what we're eating has no nutritional value. So that's the difference there. So if over the span of your life you are eating nutritiously, you are going to have an adequate metabolism. A good resource is myplate.gov, and I remember doing this project when I took nutrition as a prerequisite for nursing school, but it's a free resource, and if you're wondering what's in different kinds of foods or needing suggestions for what is a good fat, what is a complex carbohydrate, that can be a good place. So to give you an idea, and this is just something really simple that you can do in your day-to-day life, when you're looking at your plate for your meal, you want it to be about half veggies, and no, potatoes don't count. Half veggies, we're talking leafy greens, we're talking zucchini, eggplant, tomatoes. Actually, tomatoes are fruit, but we'll say tomatoes, carrots, celery, vegetables. Half vegetables, about a quarter protein, so that's your lean meats. And then you're going to take the last quarter and cut it into two. And I'm so bad at math. Okay, an eighth, you want about an eighth healthy fat. So that could be things like nut butters, nuts themselves, healthy oils, avocado, dairy if your body tolerates dairy. So that, and then about an eighth carbs. So that's where you could do rice, sweet potato, that kind of thing. And I feel like there's something else I was going to say. Oh, and then as far as how much you should eat, it kind of varies person to person. I would say definitely eat within a 12-hour window because that really helps your metabolism as well. Because think, whenever you're eating, your body is focusing its energy on digesting that food, and you don't want your body to be doing that constantly throughout a 24-hour period because your body needs time to do other things like heal itself, like get rid of toxins, and so on and so forth. So eat within a 12-hour window. There's some debate nowadays whether it's better to do 2 to 3 larger meals or whether it's better to do 3 meals with 2 snacks in between. So for now, I'm just gonna say do what works for you. And as long as you're within that 12-hour window and you're using that plate distribution method, you're gonna be good. And then of course, water. People always go for the water before you go for anything else. Okay, so that's nutrition and metabolism. Next, we want to talk about the insulin problem, is what they call it. So what is insulin? Insulin is a hormone that's produced by your pancreas, and it helps you regulate glucose. Glucose enters your body through the form of carbohydrates. You'll often hear that carbohydrates are sugars. I think a lot of people, when they think of sugar, they think of, the white, grainy bowl of sugar. Obviously, that is sugar, but carbohydrates, it falls under the larger umbrella of carbohydrates. So when you intake carbs, it breaks down into glucose. Glucose is really important because it's one of the main things your body uses to create energy, which you need for digestion, you need for your muscles, for mobility, you need for your brain to function, so on and so forth. However, when you have too much glucose, more than your body can process, this starts to become a problem. And it goes like this. You have too much glucose for your body to process. That's an environmental factor. that can trigger other factors in your body which can lead to diabetes. So if you are already at risk for diabetes because you have a history of it in your family, especially pay attention. So you do that, then you start to become insulin resistant. So insulin resistance basically means, insulin resistance means that now your body has a hard time binding insulin, which the cell needs to bind insulin in order for the glucose to leave the space of the blood and go inside the cell, where it is then transformed by the mitochondria into energy, which is why if you're diabetic, we're always checking your blood sugar level, because if it's high, that means that there's a problem and that your body is not processing glucose effectively. So that you become insulin resistance, which is pancreatic dysfunction, then you become pre-diabetic. The good news is that if you are diagnosed as pre-diabetic, guess what? You can still completely cure yourself with diet, and that's amazing. If you don't do that and you continue your bad eating patterns, then you are going to become a full-blown type 2 diabetic. Type 1, completely different process. We're just focusing on type 2 here. It is the most prevalent type by far. And then when you're a type 2 diabetic, if you're really not on top of things with your diet, it's going to be affecting your whole body. I might do a whole video on diabetes, how it affects you, and the end result if it's uncontrolled, because I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent now. But anyways, more or less, that is how too much glucose in your diet affects your insulin production. So the next thing we're going to talk about is leaky gut and inflammation. This is a really new and fascinating area of study. I have been listening to all kinds of stuff on the gut biome and how it works and how it affects your entire body. I'm just gonna make a really quick recommendation. There is a podcast called Ologies, and there is an episode on the microbiome, and it is hilarious one, mind-blowing two, because your gut, it affects so much, everything from inflammation to psychiatric health to your heart, everything. So important. So we just talked about glucose. Now we're going to talk about allergies. So a lot of people have intolerances to a lot of different foods because our diet has changed so drastically, especially over the last 50 to 100 years. So we see a lot more processed foods. People are eating a lot more dairy and a lot more bread, which used to be less hard to come by. And our bodies haven't had time to evolve to our new diet. So so leaky gut and inflammation are caused by an allergic response by your body to certain foods. So we're going to talk about two primary villains or causes of this. One is gluten, which is found in wheat, rye, and barley. The other one is casein, which is found in dairy. So what is leaky gut? So basically you have the lining of your GI tract, and remember your GI tract is the tube from your mouth to your bottom, and it processes food. So if you're having an allergy, which is an inflammatory response, the lining, the mucosa, and the cells in your GI tract start to have some spacing between them. And this allows the contents of your GI tract to leak out into the rest of your body, which is not good. There are a lot of bacteria in your body that are evolved to function most of the time positively within your GI tract. However, the rest of your body does not recognize those things, does not know how to play well with those things. So when you're leaking contents, which your GI tract has a ton of bacteria, a ton of food, a ton of all these things, it'll get into the rest of your body and it'll really start to make you sick. So we want to avoid that. And an easy way to do that is an elimination diet, which we will get to later. But basically, if you're having issues, try to eliminate any cause of the issue and then reintroduce things back. I know that's easier said than done. I know, okay, because I've done it. But it's worth it to be healthy, right? And to be able to fulfill the full potential of your life and your personal capability. Okay, the next thing we're talking about is mitochondria. I had to do a little bit of research back on this one because I was like, what is she talking about with this again? But this goes a lot back to, is the food supply today nutrient deficient? And the answer is yes and no, because it is very easy to buy foods that are full of nutrients, especially on a budget, but a lot of people do go for the processed foods. So if you're eating that, you're nutrient deficient. So remember earlier we were talking about how the body turns what you put into it into energy, and that is how you survive and live. So a really important part of that are your mitochondria, which exist inside your cells. Organelle, which is, well, I shouldn't say, hold on, not organelle. It is an organelle, which is an organ of the cell. So it's basically a part of your cell that processes glucose into energy. So that's how you move, that's how you breathe, that's how you function. So if you're not doing that, then you're going to start experiencing chronic fatigue. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about is nutrition and the brain. Of course, we want to be feeding our brain and our entire neurological system. And there are lots of things that are so important in brain health. Just really quick, all the B vitamins, vitamin C, D, and E, vitamin A and K, DHA, you want to have an adequate amount of this for brain function and also for your myelin, which is the fatty layer. This is also why it's important to have healthy fat. The fatty layer that covers your nerves, which allows your brain to send messages to the rest of your body, which is how my hands are moving right now, which is how I'm processing what's coming out of my mouth, sitting down, everything. So we need to take care of the brain. And if you have a lot of processed food and trans fat in your body, then that starts to affect brain health, and you'll start seeing things like dementia, Alzheimer's. This will also really affect other diseases that are neurological, like MS. So we've got to be careful there. And there are so many good things in this CE that I want to go over, but I don't want to lose you. So I'm just going to end here with a really fun exercise that I learned from Jim Quick, who I've talked about before, who is a leading expert in brain health and memory. And he has a list of brain foods, and I'm going to teach it to you right now. I learned this months and months ago, and I still remember it because he uses such a great learning technique. It's 10 foods that are good for your brain health, and we're going to basically assign each food to a different body part and give it kind of a little story or an image so that you can remember it, so the next time you're grocery shopping, you can buy a few of these things. So we're going to start by actually physically touching the different parts of our body that are going to be assigned to different foods. So we've got top, your head. Just do this with me, I swear. Okay, top, head, nose, mouth, touch your mouth, ears, touch your ears, your throat, go like this, your shoulders, tap your shoulders, your collarbone, your stomach, and your seat, or your bottom. So now we're going to talk about the foods, and I'm just going to name the foods for you real quick because repetition is key. Avocado, blueberries, broccoli, eggs, healthy oils, greens, fish, particularly salmon, walnuts, and chocolate, and turmeric. Okay, so now we're gonna do this again. Top, So this is going to be avocado, and I want you to picture maybe splattering an avocado on someone's head, or, you know, putting avocado in your hair for a good hair mask. 1 is avocado. 2 is your nose, and your nose is blueberries. So maybe picture, you know, like I'm picturing my 3-year-old stuffing blueberries up his nose and squirting them out because he thinks it's hilarious. So 2 is blueberries. 3 is your mouth, and your mouth is going to be broccoli. So imagine yourself eating a ton of broccoli, or I don't know, broccoli colored lipstick, or it doesn't have to make sense. It just has to like strike a chord with you so you remember. So 3 is broccoli. Next are your ears. So for your ears, we're talking about healthy fats. This is like coconut oil. This is like olive oil. So what I think of is, you know, maybe some olives for earrings, or maybe how earwax is kind of oily. So that's oil. The 4th one, right? We're on 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 is your throat. And so for your throat, I think this one's easy, especially for guys. Think about eggs. Eggs are so good for you. So maybe you swallowed a whole egg and it got stuck in your throat and it looks like your Adam's apple. Or you can think how your Adam's apple looks like an egg in your throat. The next one are your shoulders. Look at your shoulders, and I want you to imagine leafy greens. So maybe you could think of some really weird like fashion show and they have to use vegetables and they have their shoulder pads are like leaves of kale. So that's the next one, is leafy greens. After that is your fingers, and I want you to picture yourself putting your fingers in a bowl of turmeric and how weird that would look, and your fingers are covered in yellow and you're like, ugh, looks like Cheetos, but it's not Cheetos because it's turmeric. And then the next one is your belly button or your stomach, which I think of belly button and walnuts and like having a walnut in my belly button. Like I said, this doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be a memorable image. And last one's really easy because it's your bottom and it's dark chocolate. So enough said there. So let's do it one more time really fast. Avocado, top. Nose, blueberries. Mouth, broccoli. Ears, healthy oils. Throat, egg. Shoulders, greens. Collarbone, oh, I forgot the collarbone when we were doing it. Collarbone is fish, guys. Collarbone is fish. So think about a necklace made out of fish bones. Fish. Fingers are turmeric. Stomach is walnut, and bottom is chocolate. Okay, so I did forget one, but I remember, but that's because I was teaching it and going really slow. But I remembered when I went all the way through. And I mean, that's 10 things that I've remembered for months and months just by doing that trick. So I don't know, that's kind of cool and fun, and you can show people that at a party or something. All right, guys, that's it for this week. I hope that was helpful. That's part 1 of diet and disease. And next week we'll be going into specific diets and what they can treat. And it's going to be fun. So tune in. Have a healthy week, guys.